You wake up at 6:30 in the morning and reach for your glucose meter on the nightstand. The same ritual you've done every single day for the past 4 years. You prick your finger, squeeze out the drop of blood, watch the meter count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The number appears. 158. You write it down in your logbook, like always. 158. Higher than you wanted. Higher than the target your doctor gave you. Under 100 for normal, he said. You're 58 points above that. You feel that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach. Another morning with high fasting blood sugar. Another day starting with failure. You go about your morning routine. Shower, get dressed, take your medications, metformin with breakfast, like always. You eat what you've been eating for months now. 2 scrambled eggs, 1 slice of whole wheat toast with a thin spread of butter, half a grapefruit. A breakfast the diabetes educator told you was appropriate. Balanced protein, controlled carbohydrates, some fruit. You finish eating at 7:45. At 9:45, exactly 2 hours after you started eating, you test your blood sugar again. This is what your doctor told you to do. Test fasting in the morning, test 2 hours after breakfast, see how your body responds to food. The meter counts down. 162. You stare at the number. 162. Only 4 points higher than your fasting level, barely went up at all from the meal. That should be good news, right? Your blood sugar didn't spike much from eating. But then you remember what your doctor said. After meal blood sugar should be under 140. You're 22 points above that target. So now you have 2 numbers that are both too high. Fasting of 158, after meal of 162. And you sit there at your kitchen table feeling overwhelmed and confused. Which number is worse? Which one should you be more worried about? Which one is actually dangerous? Your doctor has never explained this clearly. He looks at both numbers at your appointments. He says both need to come down. He adjusts your medications, trying to lower both. But he's never told you which one matters more. Which one is actually causing damage to your body? Which one is going to give you the complications you're terrified of? Blindness, kidney failure, amputations, heart attacks? You've read articles online. Some say fasting blood sugar is the most important number, that waking up high every morning means your liver is dumping glucose all night long, that high fasting blood sugar is a sign your diabetes is progressing. Other articles say after-meal spikes are the real danger, that the sudden surge of glucose after eating damages your blood vessels, that it's those spikes that cause heart disease and strokes, that you could have perfect fasting blood sugar, but if you're spiking to 250 after every meal, you're in trouble. So which is it? You don't know. Your doctor hasn't clarified. The information online contradicts itself, and you're left testing twice a day, writing down numbers, but having no idea which numbers to actually focus on, which battles to fight, where to put your energy. Last week, you had an appointment with your endocrinologist. You brought your logbook, 3 months of data, fasting blood sugar every morning, averaging around 150 to 165, after meal readings averaging around 160 to 180. She looked through the pages. She said, your after meal control is actually pretty good. The fact that your blood sugar only goes up 10 to 20 points from meals means you're not having big spikes, but your fasting levels are too high. She increased your metformin from 1,000 milligrams twice daily to 1,500 milligrams twice daily. She said the goal is to get that fasting number down. But then you went to your cardiologist for a routine checkup the following day. You mentioned your blood sugar numbers. You told him about your fasting levels around 158 and after meal levels around 162. He said the opposite thing. He said the fasting number isn't that concerning for someone your age, 71 years old, but those after meal numbers need to come down. He said it's the post-meal glucose elevations that drive cardiovascular risk, that every time your blood sugar goes above 140 after eating, it's damaging your vessels. He suggested you cut carbohydrates more aggressively at meals to prevent any rise at all. Now, you have two specialists giving you contradictory advice. One says focus on fasting, one says focus on after meals. You left both appointments more confused than when you went in, and that confusion is paralyzing because you can't fix both at the same time with the same interventions. Eating less at dinner might help morning fasting levels, but eating more protein and fat at breakfast might raise after-meal levels. Taking more medication at night might lower fasting glucose, but increase risk of nighttime hypoglycemia. Cutting carbs aggressively at every meal might flatten after-meal spikes, but leave you without energy and losing weight you can't afford to lose. You feel like you're being pulled in two different directions, and meanwhile, your A1C, at your last test, was 7.4. Your doctor said that's not terrible, but not good enough. It should be under 7, ideally under 6.5. But nobody has explained to you which specific blood sugar readings are driving that A1C. Is it being dragged up by your high fasting levels or by your after meals, or both equally? And more importantly, which one is actually going to kill you? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're afraid of. You don't want to go blind. You don't want to lose your feet. You don't want to have a heart attack. You don't want to die early because of diabetes. But you need to know where the actual danger is. Is it in waking up at 158 every morning? Is it in those modest rises to 162 after eating? Is one of those patterns significantly more dangerous than the other, or are they equally bad? You lie awake at night thinking about this, worrying, trying to figure out what to prioritize. Should you eat differently? Should you exercise more? Should you take more medication? Should you focus on one number or both? And you have no clear answer, just anxiety, just confusion, just the feeling that no matter what you do, you're getting it wrong, that you're not protecting yourself adequately because you don't know what you're supposed to be protecting yourself from. What you're experiencing is one of the most common and frustrating gaps in diabetes education. Doctors measure both fasting and after-meal glucose. They tell you both should be in certain ranges, but they rarely explain which one is more predictive of complications, which one you should prioritize if you can't fix both at once, which one is actually dangerous versus which one is just not ideal. Today, you're going to get clarity. You're going to learn what the research actually shows about fasting versus after-meal blood sugar. Which one correlates more strongly with heart disease, stroke, kidney damage, nerve damage, eye damage? Which one predicts mortality? And most importantly, for someone your age, over 65 with diabetes, which pattern of blood sugar elevation is more dangerous and needs to be addressed first? Because you deserve clear answers. You deserve to know where to focus your efforts. You deserve to stop spinning your wheels trying to fix everything at once and instead target the thing that actually matters most. Look, I know how exhausting this confusion is. You're doing everything you can, testing multiple times a day, tracking your numbers meticulously, following the dietary advice, taking your medications. And still, you feel like you're failing because the numbers aren't perfect, and nobody will tell you which imperfect numbers are actually okay and which ones are dangerous. That's medical gaslighting. That's leaving you to figure out critical health information on your own when you should be getting clear guidance. And I want you to know that your frustration is completely valid. You're not asking for too much. Wanting to know which blood sugar readings pose the greatest risk is a basic, reasonable question that should have a clear answer. That's why this channel exists, to give you the clear, evidence-based answers that you should be getting from your medical team, but often aren't. Every week, I bring content that cuts through medical ambiguity with actual research about what matters most for diabetes management, especially in older adults, where priorities should be different. If you want this kind of clarity every week, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. You're part of a community of people who are tired of contradictory advice and vague guidelines, who want real information they can act on. Let's figure this out together. Now, I need you to pay very close attention because what I'm about to tell you changes how you should be thinking about your blood sugar control. Right now, in the United States, approximately 14 million people over the age of 65 have type 2 diabetes. The vast majority of them test their blood sugar regularly, fasting in the morning, after meals. And the vast majority have been told that both numbers need to be in normal ranges, under 100 fasting, under 140 2 hours after meals. But research over the past 15 years has revealed something critical that most doctors haven't incorporated into their practice yet. For people over 65, after-meal blood sugar elevations are significantly more dangerous than elevated fasting glucose. Significantly. Not a little bit more dangerous, a lot more dangerous. A landmark study published in Diabetes Care in 2012 followed over 3,000 adults with diabetes for an average of 8 years. They measured fasting glucose, after-meal glucose, and A1C regularly. They tracked who had heart attacks, strokes, and who died. When they analyzed the data, they found something striking. After-meal glucose was independently associated with cardiovascular events and mortality. Even after controlling for A1C and fasting glucose, people with higher after-meal glucose had significantly more heart attacks and strokes. But fasting glucose, once you controlled for A1C, showed no independent association with outcomes. Let me say that in plain English. How high your blood sugar goes after eating predicts whether you'll have a heart attack or die. How high your blood sugar is when you wake up, by itself, doesn't predict those outcomes. Another study, the DECODE study, analyzed data from over 25,000 people across Europe. They found that after-meal glucose was a stronger predictor of death from any cause than fasting glucose. People with normal fasting glucose but elevated after-meal glucose had significantly higher mortality than people with slightly elevated fasting glucose but normal after-meal glucose. A meta-analysis published in Diabetology in 2013 pulled data from 20 studies, including over 95,000 participants. The conclusion was clear. Post-meal hyperglycemia is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, independent of fasting glucose levels. The relationship is dose-dependent, meaning the higher the after-meal glucose, the higher the risk. And this relationship was strongest in older adults. What is it about after-meal blood sugar spikes that makes them more dangerous than elevated fasting levels? Let me paint you a detailed picture of what happens inside your body when your glucose spikes after a meal. When you eat carbohydrates, they break down into glucose. That glucose floods into your bloodstream relatively quickly. In someone without diabetes, insulin surges immediately and shuttles that glucose into cells within minutes. Blood sugar rises modestly, peaks around 30 to 60 minutes after eating, and returns to normal within 2 hours. But in someone with diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes with insulin resistance, the insulin response is delayed and insufficient. Glucose floods in faster than it can be cleared. Your blood sugar spikes. Maybe it goes from 150 before the meal to 220 an hour after. That spike, that rapid rise, and that absolute high level creates what's called oxidative stress in your blood vessels. The high glucose concentration causes production of reactive oxygen species, free radicals, in the endothelial cells that line your arteries. These free radicals damage the endothelium. They make it inflamed, dysfunctional, sticky. White blood cells and platelets start adhering to the damaged vessel walls. LDL cholesterol particles get oxidized and deposited into the vessel walls. This is the beginning of atherosclerosis, plaque formation, the process that leads to heart attacks and strokes. And here's the critical point. This oxidative damage is proportional to how high the glucose goes and how rapidly it rises. A sudden spike from 150 to 220 causes more damage than a steady state of 160 all day long. Studies measuring markers of oxidative stress and endothelial dysfunction show that they surge after meals when blood sugar spikes, but remain relatively stable when blood sugar is elevated but steady. After-meal spikes also cause more inflammation. Every time your glucose surges, your body releases inflammatory cytokines, IL-6, TNF-alpha, CRP. These inflammatory molecules contribute to insulin resistance, making your diabetes worse over time. They also contribute to atherosclerosis and increase the risk of plaque rupture, which is what causes most heart attacks. Chronic inflammation from repeated daily glucose spikes accelerates vascular aging and damage. After-meal glucose also affects your blood's clotting tendency. High glucose activates platelets, making them more likely to clump together and form clots. It increases levels of clotting factors and decreases natural anticoagulants. This prothrombotic state lasts for several hours after each meal. If you're having 3 glucose spikes per day from 3 meals, you're spending a large portion of your day in a prothrombotic state, increasing your risk of heart attacks and strokes. After-meal glucose also directly damages organs. Your kidneys filter your blood continuously. When glucose is high, the kidneys are exposed to that high concentration. The higher the glucose, the more damage to the delicate filtering structures. Repeated spikes cause more cumulative damage than a steady, moderately elevated level. Same with your eyes. The tiny blood vessels in your retina are damaged by glucose spikes. Same with your nerves. Glucose spikes cause oxidative stress in nerve cells, contributing to neuropathy. Now let's talk about why elevated fasting blood sugar, while not ideal, is less immediately dangerous, especially in older adults. Fasting blood sugar reflects your baseline glucose level after you haven't eaten for 8 to 12 hours. It's influenced primarily by your liver. Your liver stores glucose as glycogen and releases it gradually to maintain blood sugar between meals and overnight. In someone with diabetes, your liver often releases too much glucose, causing elevated fasting levels. This is driven partly by insulin resistance and partly by hormonal signals, particularly cortisol and growth hormone, which peak in the early morning hours. Elevated fasting glucose means your liver is overproducing and your body isn't clearing glucose efficiently. It's a sign of underlying metabolic dysfunction. But crucially, it's a steady-state elevation, not a spike. Your blood vessels aren't experiencing the same oxidative stress from a glucose level of 160 that's been stable all night as they would from a glucose level that suddenly jumps from 100 to 200 after eating. The damage from steady, moderate elevation accumulates slowly over years. The damage from repeated spikes happens more acutely and intensely. research comparing continuous glucose monitoring data with heart cardiovascular outcomes shows that glucose variability, the degree of ups and downs, is a stronger predictor of heart disease than average glucose level. Two people could have the same A1C of 7.5. One person has relatively flat glucose that stays between 140 and 160 all day long. The other person has glucose that swings from 90 to 250 with each meal. The person with the wild swings has much higher cardiovascular risk despite the same A1C. For older adults specifically, there's another reason after-meal control matters more. As you age, your blood vessels become less elastic, more prone to damage, and less able to repair themselves. The cumulative effect of years of after-meal spikes adds up. An older adult who's had diabetes for 10 or 15 years has already sustained significant vascular damage. Every additional spike adds to that damage in a way that matters more than in a younger person with healthier vessels. Additionally, older adults are at baseline higher risk for cardiovascular events simply because of age. Anything that increases that risk further, like repeated glucose spikes, has outsized impact. A 40-year-old with after-meal spikes might not have a heart attack for 30 years. A 70-year-old with after-meal spikes might have one in 3 years. The timeline matters, and for older adults, preventing near-term cardiovascular events is more important than preventing long-term microvascular complications that take decades to develop. This isn't permission to ignore fasting glucose entirely. Both matter. But if you have to prioritize, if you can't achieve perfect control of both, if you're trying to minimize medication burden and maximize safety, focus your efforts where they'll have the greatest impact on keeping you healthy and alive. Thank you for watching to the end. Take care of yourself and focus your efforts where they'll have the greatest impact on keeping you healthy and alive.